And good evening. Now like to convene the April 20th work session of the Lane Community College Board of Education meeting to order. Tammy, can you go ahead and take the roll, please?
Sure. Holly Johnson.
Here.
Angela Van Kratz.
Present.
Mike Heister.
Here.
Austin Fullnagy.
He was present, it looks like it's just disconnected.
Steve Mattel.
Here.
Rosie Pryor.
Here.
And Lisa Fragula.
Here. So we'll let the record reflect that Austin Fullnagy is joining us this evening remotely. And I'm sure we'll have him coming back in soon. So Brett, just let me know when he's joined us. The board will open the meeting with an acknowledgement of homeland and that the meeting takes place on the traditional homeland of the Kalapuya. And tonight, board member Mike Eister will read that for us.
We begin our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya. So whenever I read this, and when I read it originally, when I got to the part about the 14,000 years, I was just flabbergasted. 14,000 years. I thought it must be a mistake. I thought it must be 1,400 or 400. I just couldn't really believe it was 14,000 years. And then with recent events, I can't help but think about what's happening in the Ukraine and this principle that I just jotted down. You have something I want and I have enough power to take it, so I will. That's what so many people are so dismayed about with regard to what's happening now. And it happened here. It happened on this very land as well. I don't know how to reconcile that. I don't know how to reconcile what's happening in Ukraine with what happened here. But it seems to me that a starting point is to acknowledge it. And that's about what we're doing tonight. That's about all we can do tonight, I think. Maybe there'll be more later.
Thank you, Mike. So let's go ahead and adopt the agenda without objection. I'd like to adopt the agenda with flexibility. Is there any objection to adopting the agenda with flexibility? Okay, seeing none, we've adopted the agenda with flexibility. So let's go ahead and move on to discussion item number 1, PERS bond update. And we will hear about that topic from Dr. George Stalliard, who I would like to welcome this evening. This is the first meeting that Dr. Stalliard, our VP of Finance and Operations, has actually been able to join us here on campus. We're excited to have him here with us. So go ahead. Thank you.
Well, good evening, board members, Chairperson, President Hamilton, and colleagues and friends. This is the first time I'm presenting before a board that I could remember. I'm not asking for money. You know, so this is different. This evening, we are going to, Greg and myself is going to discuss the obligation bonds. And we are hoping that this evening we can get your approval to move forward with the bonds. So without any further ado, I let Greg present the information to us and will be available to answer any and all questions.
You're gonna, thanks, Brent. Brent, pull up our presentation. We've been talking about pension obligation bonds quite a bit here recently. So if we go to the agenda, this is kind of a quick, we have about 20 minutes for this agenda item. And we'll do a quick recap. We did some modeling with some PERS tools that we'll share with you tonight. A pro forma timeline just gives the board kind of what the expectations. And then we'll go over our recommendations and open it up for questions. So a little bit of recap, right? So we've been talking pension obligation bonds quite a bit. It started a year ago in May with the budget message, when we started looking out future years of our impact of PERS rates going up and what PERS is telling us. And so you're looking at in the 2027 biennium, 16 million. So one of the strategies that we have control is issuing pension obligation bonds. The other ones is lobbying, the state for PERS reform. That led staff to issue work with 15 other districts to get a ECHO Northwest presentation. This is a legally required report before any district issues pension obligation bonds. And they did that on January 6th. Zach and I were there. They presented to us and the 15 other districts, and it allowed us to ask a bunch of questions in that. If we do proceed with that, along with the board resolution, we'll also have their presentation there as well on the in your board packet next coming up in May. We invited Carol Samuels of Piper Sandler. She's the underwriter of this, would be the underwriter of this issuance, and she came to our work session in February. And then we continued the discussion in March, where you had some questions about, do we issue half of it? Are we legally required to issue the full UAL? And so we did some more analysis, and we'll have that later on in the presentation. If we go to the next, just to recap the discussion, right? So this is a strategy that may help us reduce it. The concept is to borrow low, invest high, and you get some positive arbitrage, right? So this is the time in selling bonds that you want positive. Current interest rates, after talking with Carol Samuels, is in between pushing 4.5% is what we'd expect as of today. These bonds, when we issue them, they're in our own side account with PERS, right? So it's our account. So any losses or earnings are credited to us. And since 1999, 150 pension obligations bonds were issued, mostly positive, not all positive, but ours in 2003 was positive as well. And so some of it is the timing of, the possible risk is timing of earnings, because the negative earnings early on, it takes all that energy out in the future earnings. So that's one of the risks. The other ones we talked a little bit about, side accounts have more volatility in our PERS rates each biennium. So we see a higher fluctuations for those without. That doesn't mean that that's a negative. Just means that you got to do some cash flow planning on those years that rates jump on you. And then we talked about PERS rates, and I added that bullet to remind us again about PERS reserves, the importance for cash flow. So let's go on to the ECHO Northwest present. And so Carol went over this slide, and we want to bring this again. So when they did this analysis back in January, they did it on interest rate, borrowing rates of 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5. And so we as a staff, we wouldn't recommend anything going higher than 4.5, and then we'll have that decision when we sell. If it's like 4.51 we'll ask for some leeway there, but this is the analysis. And this analysis, what this analysis shows is 74% of the time, the district would be favorable if we went ahead. and sold bonds. And this is on their analysis, so. Yeah, we'll go. So this is a slide. So this is a tool that PERS has on their website. And so this is some of the questions about asking, do you issue half or full? We have a decision. I mean, we don't have to issue the full UAL, but the full UAL is what our cap is. And so, but you can see, you know, in the analysis that ran, and we had Carol run a lot of other detail scenarios. You know, what you're looking at between 32 and we ran on 32 million and 66 million. Not quite half, but I mean, what you see is if you don't do anything, that's the gold bar, right? And so that's the risks of not doing anything. I guess the difference is, you know, when we looked at it, we're feeling that going out, you know, the full UAL, and we checked with the other community colleges that went out before us, the 5 that went out last year, all of them issued at the full unfunded actuary liability. I'll pause a little bit. Feel free to ask questions. I mean, I don't mind getting interrupted. I just want to be, I know I have 20 minutes and
Mike, go ahead.
So I'm wondering if it's too late for us to be able to take it. I mean, if interest rates have gone up fast enough, high enough, that it's too late for us to be advantaged by this. I thought you said 4.75 earlier.
no, 4.5.
Oh,
4.5.
okay.
We
okay.
wouldn't, as a staff, recommend going any higher than 4.5 because that's what the analysis was done on.
And where are they right today?
Getting close to the 4.5.
Okay, well, that's my question.
Yeah.
Is there a point at which,
I wouldn't, we wouldn't go over.
Yeah, my recommendation after I spoke to Carol is that if we get approval, we could start doing the necessary paperwork to get that 4.5. The question I asked Carol and Gary was whether or not if we get that 4.51, what do we do? My recommendation, roll the dice and go forward with it. One percentage point is not making a big difference. But I also want to add, when I first speak to Carol, I say, Carol, I need data that I can physically see the impact. And I must say that my controller and Carol came up with this slide. And I remind them that the one thing I remember from the Zoom meeting, I don't remember which board members asked the question, but what about doing half? My question was, what about doing nothing? And when you look at that data, it speaks for itself.
Rosie?
So my question is sort of a follow-up to Mike, which is how can we accelerate this timeline? I mean, I think I have the same anxiety that perhaps others have, that every day we're in jeopardy of losing access to our opportunity. I mean, what if the board, we don't make these decisions now, and May, whatever it is, 5, 4 is 2 weeks at least away or longer. What if the board convened a Zoom meeting Friday of this week and authorized you to go? Can you make the call to Salem that very day and get the process started? And is there any reason why, other than my colleagues may not want to do this at all, that we wouldn't expedite it?
So I can respond to that.
Okay.
So, because I asked Marge about this already, and if it seems like, I mean, Rosie's referring to the fact that we don't typically vote on things in a work session, but if it seems that the sentiment of the board is supportive of moving forward, then as the chair, I can direct the president to move forward immediately.
Does that work for everybody else?
We can continue the presentation? You mean that if there is consensus? Yeah.
So I'll jump ahead. Let's go over the pro forma timeline, right?
Before you begin, I see that Austin has a question.
Actually, it was more of a comment, but it was covered in the discussion that was just had. I'm in support of discussing that further, and yeah, look forward to the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Austin. Okay, go ahead. Oh, Steve?
And you don't necessarily have to enter this now. If it turns out it's coming up in the presentation, then you can cover it then as well. I appreciate the follow-up information on the half, so we can, because for me, there's some value in reducing our risk. That's the reason to do half, because we are, as you said in your own words, rolling the dice, which I don't think is generally a good thing to do with public's money. The other option, of course, is to delay, right? We could, and that's the question I would have for you. Like, maybe we decide we're not going to do this for a couple of years until interest rates come back down. And so I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Again, it doesn't have to be right now, but at some time during the presentation.
Well, let's go over the timeline. So bond counsel is going to create a legal resolution. So it'll be probably, it's like a regular pension bond or a regular, you remember the obligation bond that was several pages long, right? So it's up to, there's some specific languages. Carol was letting us know. We have to get that resolution. The other thing that we legally have to do is publish the Echo Northwest report, and then you approve it. So, so what really is doing is that creation of that resolution, and then giving our guidance, whether or not we're going to go with the full UAL, and then what interest rates, and then May 5th, as soon as that resolution is approved by the board, then that very next day, we submit a request to Millman's to start calculating that. It takes them a while. We're going to ask them to expedite it and have it done by June 17th. And so, and then there's the 2 months of creating the official documents. And June 27th is our final opt-in. Do we go or no?
Hey, Angela.
I'm curious about in this timeline. So, okay, I recently did a home equity loan, right? And so the moment I did my application, I got to lock in my rate. Is there a point at which we lock in the rate, or is that at June 17th?
That is the bond sale on July 11th. That's when the rates get locked in, and it takes, the closing is the 26th where we get the fund. So, and I don't have the treasury slide in here where the rates are going, but Carol was fairly comfortable with this time. I could, like I said, after tomorrow, I can contact bond counsel, depending on some of that, if they could have a resolution in time. All right, so that's the timeline questions. If we can go back to I think that was Steve's question from earlier on the chart.
Can you go back to that other point? Steve, if we do nothing, the cost of the pension goes up. So I would recommend that at least we make a decision. If you're not comfortable for the whole 66, at least make a decision for half, because when you look at the data, in my opinion, speak for itself. But we just cannot do anything, because then the cost of the pension continue to rise. So my recommendation would be think about half, think about the full thing, but give us some type of direction this evening so we know what we have to do.
Yeah, to be clear though, this is not, if this was a guarantee, this would be an open and shut case. It's not a guarantee, it's just a projection.
And that's correct. There's risk. And we are hoping that we can go in low and make money at a higher rate. But the one thing that is clear, I think, after I spoke to Carol a couple of times by Zoom, is that we got to do something. We just cannot kick the ball down the street and go for it. So my recommendation at least give us some type of direction, but don't let's agree on doing nothing.
So Austin, Austin is gone. So I just wanted to remind everybody that in order for anybody viewing this meeting or participating digitally, you must speak into the mic. So otherwise, anybody who's viewing or attending online won't be able to hear what you're saying. Austin, were you able to hear those recent comments? Great. So I see your hand was up. Mike.
So just as a matter of process, I support taking this action, probably at the full level. But as a matter of process, I'm reluctant to take a vote without having a publicly announced meeting and opportunity for public comment on the on whatever it is we're voting on. So that's where I stand on that.
Anyone else?
One of the analysis, Steve, that Carol ran was, what if we issued at 4.5% at, well, this is in the slide. This is one of the analysis. If we issued this in 2007, and you remember what happened in 2008 with the 27% decline, even then it takes 20 years to get to zero. But even if we had issued in 2007, we'd have saved 174,000 over 20 years, which is zero. And in the years when I'm looking at it, some of the negatives, if we had done it in 2007, would have been about a $400,000 to $500,000 difference. So that gives me some comfort, especially if we had a PERS reserve built for those cash flow.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Angela?
I like to think of myself as being pretty risk averse. And so seeing the amount of risk in this makes me very, very nervous. But it's a sure thing that we're going to have more expense than we can handle. And so that makes me far more comfortable with taking the risk. And I do support this proposal, and I do think we should move forward as fast as possible. So thank you for the recap.
Steve?
I'm kind of on the fence. I'll be honest. I'm still kind of weighing the odds of this thing. I have to say though, if this was my money and I was doing this just, with my own money, trying to make a buck, I'd do it. But this is the public's money. It's very different, right? I'm one of 7 people making a decision what to do with tens of millions of dollars of the public's money. And I won't be on the hook if we make a mistake. The public will be on the hook for my mistake, our mistake, if that's what it turns out to be. So I view it very differently than how I would go about it if it was my own. And it is a gamble. We're gambling, which doesn't feel all that good to me with the public's money. In my own view right now, I feel like we have honestly missed our opportunity. We should have done this 2 years ago when the situation was much more in our favor. And now the risks have gotten to the point where I don't know that I could comfortably support it.
And Steve, let me just give you my feeling when I start to speak to Greg and Carol. I felt the same way like you feel this evening. So I asked Carol, I said, go back, give me some data that I can take a look at. And this slide that is up there now, the historic rate, credit and savings, from the time we issued the bonds back in, I think I can't get my glasses, I think it's 2004 to current, we have saved $18 million. That's the historic data with the risk. Of course, time has changed, but I have to re-emphasize, board members, that we have to do something. The expense for the pension is not waiting on us. We're gonna have to find that money. President Hamilton gonna have to find that money. So the only option I would recommend tonight, is just think about it and see if you can give the staff some direction to move forward with it. And yes, let me emphasize that, yes, there's risk. But I want you to trust that Georgia Stallard is a steward of taxpayer money. And I'm not going to just make recommendation on taxpayer money because I'm a taxpayer myself and we work hard for our money. But when you look at this data, I'm presented this as the VP for Finance. I am more than comfortable with the savings I'm seeing there from the time we issued the bonds, that the risk maybe is not as great. But I can assure you, if we do nothing, I'm going to be coming back to this board and asking this board for some money to balance the budget.
Mike?
Well, I think Dr. Stallier sort of made the point that I was going to make. There is risk to the college and the public in taking this action, but if we don't take the action, we could also face dire consequences. So it's not no risk to take no action.
Understood.
Anyone else? Okay.
So just to explain what this staff recommendation is. So we're gonna come, one of our recommendations, right, is to come with a full UAL at the time of issuance. So what happens is as of December 31st, our unfunded actuary liability was 66.7, right? So that was 2020. So when we ask them for a renewal, that's going to be higher than the 66 million and all the numbers that we're coming to you with. And so we could change the language, whatever the board directs us, right? We can change it to, whatever the half of the issuance, we could do that. That's what the board desires. So that would be our recommendation. That's what, after we get the sense, we'll go to bond council and, hey, this is what our board would look forward to on a May 4th. That'll give us plenty of time to publish both the Echo Northwest report. If you guys read that and had questions, we can actually get some questions answered back from Echo Northwest for you, as well as on the if there was any public comment.
Rosie?
I would like to ask if we could take a straw poll. My personal recommendation is that the board support moving forward for the full 66.7 million. And I'm interested in a straw poll of support for that. I think that's 6 of us.
And just for the minutes in that, it'll be higher than 66.
Oh,
It
okay.
will be higher because once, we're asking Milliman's to calculate our UAL specifically. So
I just want to clarify that we have not approved anything. We would be adopting a resolution at the board meeting, but we are directing the president to move forward in the process. Mike?
So just to make sure I understand the timing, if by the time this gets implemented, rates are up to 5%, do we have the option to unmake the decision?
June
Okay.
27th, yeah, that's the opt-in.
All right, okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next agenda item. So we have the ACCT Equity Action Agenda, and Dr. Hamilton is going to speak with us about it.
Thank you. So about 2 years ago, the board started to actively work on their diversity work, which was a really good thing. And the board passed a resolution regarding Black Lives Matter, all good work. And what we've learned, we've evolved along the way, is we need to be more intersectional and look at a broader scope of what equity means across for our students. So meanwhile, the American Association Community Colleges had published the Equity Action Agenda. And we did talk about it actually a few times when I researched the minutes, but I'm actually asking the board to go a step further, to be even more proactive and to adopt it. and we would bring it to you to adopt it, because it means we're all in. That's saying basically we're all in, and you are all in to me. You are already all in, but I think it's important to go on record that we're all in. So I do recommend, I hope you had a time to review this. And it isn't that you're signing away on every line. It's more of the concept of the philosophy that you're all in. Questions?
Questions, comments? Mike?
As far as I'm concerned, this can go on the consent agenda for our next meeting.
Angela?
I'm curious, I guess, I think you were getting at this, Marge, what it means to adopt it. Would we use like the key questions as sort of guiding principles as we go through, looking at decisions that we're making? I guess I don't really understand kind of the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of how we would use it.
It's okay. It was written as if you were in the beginning stages. You have far evolved past this from over the past few years. It really is made for a board to think about how to approach the whole equity agenda. So you do not have to go like line by line and ask individual questions, but like our equity lens, you do. We actually mentally go through who's at the table, who isn't at the table. After a while, you start to ingrain these questions. So a partial yes, we do ask that, but it's not like you have to ask them formally out loud with it's one of these things where we read it, we reread it, we absorb it, and then we keep going back to it, kind of to check ourselves, that the board will check themselves. Are we doing all this?
I have myself in the queue, and then Austin will be after me. So I did have that question as well, Angela, and I did reach out to somebody at ACCT who actually helped me find this document before we had it in the board packet. And one of the things that they did say was that, yes, it's designed to be used as like some guiding principles, some guiding questions. But the other thing that she said was that they're also trying to make an effort to have like a national agenda, right? And so when our board passes a resolution or adopts this, like it demonstrates that at the national level that community colleges are in solidarity behind this work. And so it helps them do their work. It helps them, like when they advocate at the national level, to say, we have this many community colleges. Oh, you're an Oregon representative. Look, LCC, is signed on to this agenda. So it also helps them with advocacy work. Austin?
Yeah, I was going to mention the advocacy work side of things, but also, yeah, I feel like we're doing all of almost, if not all, the vast majority of this already. I am in full support of having this on the consent agenda.
Steve?
I'm also generally in support. Just a curiosity question. It's for you, Richard. I see here next steps includes develop data systems to support equity and collect data on equity indicators to make positive change. Have you given that any thought yet? Or, what kinds of new data might we collect to track this? Sorry to make you stand and walk. That's
Yes, we have. What we're looking at now are the benchmarks, both from the state and national employment, the state and national student progress for all cultures and races. As of today, we are ahead of the state data in our persons of color and their success rates here at the college. And what we're looking at now is the program level of inclusion. Although we're, as a college as a whole, we're ahead, I think there are some programs we could do a little better in. And with the help of student affairs and academic affairs, our provost who is sitting here with us, we're digging into that data right now. As a matter of fact, he's on some of our dashboards as we're talking. So it is in progress. We plan to launch July 1st. You remember late last year, or early in the fiscal year of this year, you approved a BI initiative. Well, we have been diligently working on that. We have, he's looking at the first release to the cabinet and to the deans. We are releasing it to you next month and to the full college July 1st. So we have been digging in deep, and we are updating our data storage system with our partners at Ellucian So we should be fully functional by July 1 and on task, on target, and on budget, which is important. Thank you.
Well, for me, that makes all the difference in the world because it's really hard to act on these things unless you have some sense of,
Yeah,
where you're at, but knowing that we're pursuing that makes a big difference for me. So thank you.
thank you.
Marge?
Yeah, and the last comment I want to make is that this also puts us in line with all the 17 community colleges because they have all made a point. Now, I don't know if every single 17 of the 17 have done that, but we've been asked to make sure that we have done this.
Holly?
So when you say that it puts us in line, are we just doing this just to say that we're doing it? Are we actually going to act? Because, I mean, we can talk the talk, but if we're not walking the walk and if we're all going to ignore this and never bring it up again, and just so we can say that, yes, we did this and we're on board, it's not good enough. And so yeah. And then I also had a question. I see key questions for trustees. My question was there about how this affects human resources and their policy for equitable and inclusive workforce in the interview processes and things like that. I don't want to just say, yes, yay, how exciting. I've been a part of so many organizations that say, yes, we have a stance, we have inequity, we have this, but then it's not really acted upon, which is, yeah. And so that kind of bothers me, that we're just doing this just so we can say that we're on board with all of in alignment with all of the other community colleges. I like Steve's questions about data and what we're working on, and let's see some numbers and let's see how we acted on this. But just to say that we're doing it because we are all equitable or we believe in, equity and diversity. I'm so tired of hearing that and then it not really being the case. And so I would not be in favor of adopting something just to be in alignment with other community colleges. Yeah, I've just seen it happen too often. We're just so we can check a box and say that we have a stance. It's not good enough.
Richard? Oh, go ahead, Marge.
ma'am.
No, I think everybody, myself included, we all agree with you, but I am 100% confident this is not that board. It's up to us. It's up to this college we need a guidebook though. That's why we have to have diversity plans and that's why we have to have HR plans. And I think we are counting on the board to have some guidance so that you can ask the right questions. Like we're trying to help you all ask the right questions, ask about disaggregated data, which is really what this is all about. We want to show that the outcomes are not just institutional, that they are across not only the programs, but we are digging deep. So we want you to ask the hard questions. That's a good point.
I can share that we're working on your strategic plan right now. And we are looking at the work that we have done in alignment. So you will be seeing dashboards to that effect of where we have gravitated and made improvements based on diversity, equity, inclusion. We use the state and the nationals for an alignment for benchmark. So we at least had something to guide us, but that is not representative of the independent progress that we make. That's why we're building this system out. So you can see that your decisions are gaining traction and that movement's being made forward.
Thank you. I think that's what I wanted to hear, the strategic. There was a
Yes, ma'am.
plan.
And so Holly, I'm hearing general support for, we would be moving this forward to the agenda at the next board meeting, but I think I would propose that we not include it in the consent agenda just because I'm a fan of us publicly recognizing that we are committed to this work. And I think that I can work on making sure that whatever recommendation or resolution we have, that it includes making sure that the board is being reported to, which we've already asked, making sure that we're tracking information so that it is not just the adoption of a resolution to adopt a resolution, but that we're clearly putting structures in place to do that. So any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move us on to board policies.
So this is the first time we've done this in person as well. I've been here a while. I'm a little bit jealous that Mars got that passed in whole, as a whole, rather than going line by line like we're doing with the board policies, but I'll hold off on that. So we've got 5 policies today we're going to talk about. And one of them if you were here last month when Brett was going through them, I was absent. You'll remember 3410, which is the first one. Brett, have you got the crosswalk? Working on it. Okay. So 3410 is the non-discrimination policy, and there's a corresponding policy. It doesn't overlap perfectly. That's board policy 550. And if you recall, when you're talking about non-discrimination, right, you've got all of these different levels of protected groups. So you've got the federal level, which is the least inclusive, the state of Oregon, and then Lane's own policy, which was 550. And I think when the OCCA was doing this, they had options, right, to add extra groups if the board at a certain college decided to add those groups. And I know this isn't going to surprise any of you. Some colleges are going to be more inclusive than others in Oregon. While it's a blue state, it's not all blue, right? And we have colleges in the red portions. So I think they wanted to kind of be in the middle somewhere. And so what I did with this policy, knowing that there was discussion about inclusivity and the fact that this board has been in favor of being more inclusive rather than less inclusive, is we've got the way that it reads now, 3410 is about as inclusive as you can get. It includes almost, I'm not sure I can think of another protected class that I've seen anywhere else that I would include. The Lane policy was more inclusive than the OCCA policy. So I included the Lane policy, the current Lane policy groups. There was also a question about if you weren't part of a group, about process and that, filing a discrimination claim. And I can assure you that we have a COPS policy, or a COPS, I got to be careful with policy and procedure, a COPS procedure for filing those complaints. And there's none of those complaints, whether they're related to a protected class or not related to a protected class, are going to be ignored. They're all going to be investigated. Now, it may be that the investigation, nothing comes to the investigation, but they're all going to be investigated. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that protected class or no protected class, we're committed to investigating all aspects of discrimination. So that's the first policy, and I would recommend. Oh, and one other thing that I meant to say at the very beginning, all of the policies tonight are legally required. And I know Austin, I'm pretty sure he was in person at Karen's OCCA presentation on Wednesday, and I was on the phone, and she is very adamant as Karen can be, about doing very little wordsmithing of the legally required policies. She's much more lenient for the recommended as good policy and legally advised and things like that. But when they're legally required, I see Austin nodding his head. When they're legally required, she feels like they've got a team of 14 attorneys or 12 attorneys that put these together, and she feels really good about the exact language. So I would just ask that you think about that. But anyway, so 3410 would be the new non-discrimination policy. And the other thing that it does that the current policy doesn't is it talks not just about employment, it also talks about enrollment in students, which I think is another, inclusive portion of this particular policy.
Hey, Angela.
Oh, surprise. I'm going to bring up my question again. Taking into account Karen being adamant on this topic and recognizing her vast expertise, there is in the third paragraph of the new proposed policy, the last line reads, "The president shall establish administrative procedures that ensure all members of the college community can present complaints regarding alleged violations of this policy." And I'm great on that. The part where I get a little hung up is, "and have their complaints heard in accordance with state and federal laws regarding non-discrimination." So I understand that our COPS policies, procedures handle this. I guess I'm just wondering if the board should be more clear that complaints will be heard regardless of whether the complaint class is protected by a state or federal class. It reads to me as though we're only guaranteeing that your complaint will be heard in accordance with state and federal laws. And I would like us to sort of codify a guarantee that your complaint will be heard, regardless of whether that class is one of these sort of subsets. And so I don't really have a proposed language change. And I hear what you said, Karen and 14 lawyers came up with this. I certainly don't think I can write language better than they can. I guess I'm just, does anybody else have this?
Rosie?
I do have I have a question for you, Angela. Is it? I'm trying to understand if your question is really about our complaint procedure in general, and you want to codify that all complaints will be heard, or if it's just about complaints related to discrimination. Because if we've covered every group protected class, is there anybody left? Is there anybody not covered by this policy?
Not probably in Oregon. Oregon's age limit is 18. So pretty much everybody on here, everybody on campus is going to be covered in one way.
So that's what I
or
was
shape or
wondering,
form.
if what you're wanting to codify is more about our generic complaints process, that all complaints will be heard, or if it's just discriminatory complaints.
Thank you. I think it's, so the way it reads to me is that you can make a complaint about alleged violations of this policy. And this policy has an expansive list of protected classes. But then if the complaints are only required to be heard in accordance with state and federal laws, there are some categories in this policy that aren't in those.
State and
categories.
federal laws.
Exactly. And so I'm worried about the fallout there where we haven't specified that those complaints will be heard. That I know that the college is doing that. What I'm saying is that I think the board should say that we expect the college to do that.
I have Austin in the queue.
My understanding of that term, in accordance with state and federal law, is that laws change, and it also allows for more inclusivity in the language. Mike, if I'm completely off, you can correct me, but that's the kind of the interpretation I got from Karen.
Yeah, that wasn't what I was going to say. That's correct. What I was going to say is the way I read this is what you're talking about is how you hear them. So what I read this is you'll have complaints heard with due process that's required under state and federal laws, rather than the in accordance with state and federal laws relating to the protected class or the class that you're claiming discrimination against. It would be rather you're going to hear them with, and you have the full the due process requirements of state and federal law and how you're going to deal with those complaints, which we would do. That's my reading of that particular line.
So you're reading it as you would receive due process regardless of what class the alleged violation falls under,
Well,
as long as it's in this policy?
The way I'm reading it is that once the member makes a complaint, the complaint will be heard in following state and federal law, and that would be the due process. So you would have an opportunity to make your complaint. The person who was being complained about or persons would have an opportunity to respond. There would be a due process would be followed in the investigation, and any resulting discipline or actions would take place only after that due process was followed, rather than, something less than that, which we would.
Mike?
I wonder if there's a way to document that. I may be enough that we just agree to that but I'm afraid someone may not think to go back and look at the minutes. I'm remembering a court case from a long time ago from another campus I was at, where the judge concluded, if you can't be strange on a college campus, where can you be strange? That was the judge's quote. And my experience in over 40 years in higher education is there's a wide variety of people that come to college. And it's conceivable that someone might feel discriminated against for reasons that are far different from anything that's listed, even though we've got a pretty comprehensive list. But I would like to somehow document that what we mean with this is that due process will be followed in the way we handle any kind of a discrimination complaint. It's along the lines, I think, of the point you were trying to make, or we're making.
What if after, in accordance with, we inserted the term, due process requirements within state and federal laws, or something
I'd
along
be
those
happy
lines?
with something like
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Because you're totally right. I mean, I'm sure everybody here that's of a certain age can remember the little desks, and they didn't have the left-handed desks. And we don't have left-handed people in here as a protected class, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Angela?
Thank you. I appreciate all of the discussion and wordsmithing, which I know Karen advised us against. Is it possible that we could get her opinion on our wordsmithing before we move it to the?
That's what I wondered too. If we could forward your observation to her.
I would like to not adopt something that's gonna get us in trouble.
So Mike, you can follow up on that
Mhm.
and check with Karen about those additions
Yes.
of language, and we'll move it forward to the consent agenda.
Okay.
So let's move on to OCA Board Policy 3420.
So I know that when you look at your policies and when you look at the crosswalk, this one doesn't really have a LCC analogous policy. I'd like to kind of, if it's okay, and you can ask questions about them individually, but I kind of really think that 3420, 3430, and 3433 sort of go together. I mean, I know the EEO is more of an employment thing, but those three really talk about, treating people equally and not discriminating or harassing them again because of certain aspects of their lives. And our policy, which is 630, which I sort of put in there with 3430, is kind of talks about that same thing with respect to harassment. Hey, well, maybe we'll do let's do 3420 separately, I guess. 3420 has to do with your equal employment opportunity. So it really asks the president to come up with a set of requirements, and we already have these, to provide non-discriminatory set of procedures to make sure employment decisions aren't discrimination, for any protected class. I think all of us probably have run across this in our various work settings for years and years and years. And Lane has a pretty good policy, or a pretty good EEO language with all of its HR materials and things like that. So this is just putting a policy in place to direct the president to do something that the president's probably did 30 years ago, 20 years ago.
Okay, so we're looking at BP 3420. Legal counsel recommends adopting this policy. Are there any questions or comments? Angela?
So many comments about policies. Thank you for your patience. When we talk about I think maybe the second to last paragraph, when we talk about complying with federal and state law, equal employment opportunity that complies with federal and state law. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to reference the list that we've painstakingly made in 3410 to sort of be a little bit more broad in our application of this. I know that this is another legally required, and Karen says not to mess with it. So I say this hesitantly, but still curiously.
I mean, certainly we could ask Karen what she thinks about that. This is an area that I would say is pretty well settled across states and the federal government as far as law goes. I think if you go to most any employer in any state, you're going to see an EEO statement, policy, procedure, whatever they want to call it, that's going to look very similar to most other employers. That being said, certainly we could ask Karen about it and see what she thinks.
So I'm comfortable moving this forward without that. I mean, I think it represents a pretty consistent EEO policy for many organizations. But it can't hurt to ask that question. I'm fine moving it forward. So Mike will
Okay.
follow up
Oh.
just with that question. Otherwise, we will move the majority of the language forward to the consent agenda. So Mike, your recommendation is that we look at 3430 and 3433 together?
Right. The current policy on harassment includes a separate paragraph for sexual harassment, and then it has a separate paragraph for harassment based on race, ethnicity, national origin, or sexual orientation. There's also a giant paragraph about the zero tolerance policy. And if you look at 3430, that's a prohibition on harassment in general. And then when you look at 3433, that's a prohibition of sexual harassment under Title IX, which I think the reason they separated those out is, well, there could be many reasons. One of the reasons is because under the previous administration, Title IX was changed significantly, and it's in the process, I think, of sort of coming back to what it had been for years and years. So it may be that may have been one of the reasons that they decided they wanted to pull Title IX out and specifically set forth a separate policy for that rather than including it in 3430. The other thing about the changes to Title IX, they were significant in how you investigated and the rules around the rights of the accused versus the rights of the accuser. And so I do think that that's one of the reasons that they pulled them out. But honestly, the OCCA policies are quite a bit more robust than Lane's policy was. But I do think that 3430 and 3433 kind of go together, and they largely subsume everything that was in 630.
Okay, questions or comments? Legal counsel does recommend adopting these two policies. Okay, so we'll move those forward to the consent agenda.
And then finally, hopefully there's no wordsmithing on this 12-word policy. This is just simply, it's a policy. It is legally required, however. It's simply a policy to direct the president to establish procedures for security and access. And I think this probably stems from campus shootings and things that have happened at educational institutions nationwide, unfortunately, over the last 25, 30 years. And so I do think that this is it's a very important policy. And I think it's very important for the college to have a robust security plan for catastrophic events, not just shootings, but in this area, earthquakes, wildfires, volcanic activity, perhaps.
Okay, so legal counsel does recommend adopting this policy. Any questions or comments? Austin? Oh, okay. Hand went up.
Actually, my question was if it also pertained to natural disasters. Mike answered that.
Okay, great. So, all right, so we'll move it to the consent agenda. That's the last one for this evening. Less than a half an hour, Mike. Yeah.
Why couldn't you do that, Brett?
All right, so future meeting dates and agenda items. Just want to note that coming up in May, we do have meetings scheduled for each Wednesday of the month for budget committee and board related meetings. For May 11th and May 25th, which are only the budget committee meetings with no related board meeting or work session, we will be meeting in Zoom for those. We won't be meeting in person. The other meetings will be high flex situations where we do have some budget committee members that have requested to attend digitally, but we'll be meeting in person for those. And we are getting guidance from from the president of how we will move forward in the budget committee in terms of timeline and stuff like that. And we'll have more of a conversation about that at our next board meeting and when we meet with the budget committee. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Mike?
Are any of those meetings that are scheduled are they as needed, or do we anticipate that we will need all of them?
So the dates on which there are only budget committee meetings and not a board meeting or a work session are as needed, but we are anticipating that we will need the May 11th meeting. But there is a possibility that the May 25th meeting, we will not need.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Maybe even. the 18th.
Angela,
No, we didn't.
What time are those budget committee meetings? Are they the usual 6 o'clock?
so the plan is for some of them, if we have a board meeting, we would be starting at 5:30. And then if we have a work session, same thing. But if it's a budget committee meeting, with no following meeting, we would be meeting at 6 o'clock. And we can make sure that gets sent out to everybody. Any other questions or comments for the good of the order? Holly?
I do. At our last meeting on April 6th, I brought up a question and I was told that in our next work session, we can discuss it. And it was about the KLCC being a department of LCC. And the proposed $100,000 fee to cover some of the services that LCC offers or provides for the station. And then I had a couple questions about that. And one of my questions was, is there any wiggle room for that fee? And is this administrative recovery fee a one-time thing, or if it was going to be repeated, should the board expect, the station expect this again? And if so, at what amount? Is it based on fundraising? Just wanted some clarification.
Marge?
Thank you. Yeah, we've had a couple of good meetings with KLCC. And we discussed the amount. There's wiggle room. So they are working with Zach to figure a more fair amount that would provide evidence that they're helping with the budget. And we understand that it's always a hardship, every department on campus that does a transfer back. Now, is it every single time? No. What we are going to be discussing with them, though, is how do we determine how much each year? Will it be a formula? There is a very, I think, Zach can probably do a better job at articulating that, how their funds cycle back to us. And, there are times that could happen where the money that is cycled back from the donors does not pay for all of the expenses. So I think this is a wonderful time to really take a look at that. So we're in discussions with them. Everybody feels that their questions are being answered. So I think we feel a little bit better about that moving forward.
Okay, that's good. You did tell me that you guys were going to have some discussions. So that's good to hear. But your answer is yes, there is wiggle room. So that's part of the discussion.
Yes, there is wiggle room. And,
Okay.
and no, it is not a firm 1,000, 100,000 it's really should be dependent on monies in, monies out every year.
Okay, and that's probably going to be part of the MOU.
It could be, that's what, we're trying to be flexible with them, actually, the MOU.
Right, because before it was kind of on a handshake when we had an agreement with.
Oh,
the
no, we're getting
station.
away from that. Will it be an
Right.
appendix, a separate document, or an MOU? I'm not sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I think
yeah,
we're gonna
okay.
wait.
I
let them
think
do their-
something in writing would probably be more
Yes,
comfortable, I think, for everybody.
and that's the good
involved.
thing that came of this, having something that people can be more planful about.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Rosie?
No, I don't need to.
Okay, Austin?
I wanted to just thank the staff really quick for putting this all together, this high flex board meeting that we have together. For one, because I'm a big giant person in the screen behind you guys, which makes me feel nice and big and powerful. But anyway, but also it allows for inclusion and inclusion within our community and so forth. And on the note of inclusion, I just wanted to make a quick dynamic comment. Obviously we have the cabinet sitting in front of us and so forth. And I think we can include additional people at that table. I've had conversations with the student body government, and they obviously provide a presentation to us at our board meetings. And I would love for them to have a seat at the table, as well as with our faculty and classified professionals. I believe in the past that we did have that type of dynamic, and I hope that we can, as we have this high flex environment, that we can have that available again in the future. And like I said, since our last meeting, I've actually met with the student body and had numerous conversations with them about how can we be more inclusive of student voices, and especially at board meetings. So thank you.
Thanks, Austin. We can discuss that with Marge at one of our agenda setting meetings. We are a little tight on space in here, but there's always problem solving approaches. Anybody else? Steve?
There's some feedback I received from a community member. I think she wishes to be anonymous at this point, so I'll respect that. But anyways, I got a call saying that there seems to be some conversations going on about resizing the career and technical building, and the person and people are feeling, is what I'm hearing. I'm not corroborating this, but that it's violating, potentially the spirit of the bond. I simply said I would, raise the issue with the board and seek some feedback there as to, the veracity of that or otherwise, or is this a rumor that's going on? But I said at this point in time, the board hadn't been made aware of any changes, but if there are any, of course, sooner or later it would come to us. But I want to make you all aware that that's at least a concern that's out there.
Thanks, Steve. It's my understanding that there's a strong commitment to that building, and we will be hearing information about it at the next board meeting. I've also heard concerns from community members, and I think Marge can address that as well.
Yeah, I think quite a few people have contacted me with similar rumors, and I think part of that was information getting out of context or to folks. I have personally talked to some members in the community to assure them that we're fully committed to advanced tech, or what I'm told, it's iTech now, right? Industry, technology, and trades. That's our new, so fully committed. But it's a puzzle right now, putting the puzzle pieces together, and we're looking at, we are not going any less. If anything, we've exceeded it by about 10 million, and we're trying to figure out how to make it as affordable as we can. So these folks are working hard on that, and they'll be bringing back probably within a month, a summary of where we are with the projects.
Yeah, I think my main message is that the rumor mill seems to be churning.
It
And it's
is.
probably not helpful, and you probably want to nip it in the bud sooner than later.
We're calling as many of them by phone as possible. Thank you so much.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm sorry, I have one more. At our next meeting, actually at our last meeting, we had someone come and talk about, is it the 3S program or the Student Support Services Program? I forget the exact name of it. And I'm just wondering if that's going to be part of our next board meeting, if something along those lines, or that department.
Yeah, I think Paul can address that.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. We will bring a conversation regarding S3 specialized support services to the next board work session. And
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I'm done.
You don't have to be. Anybody else? Okay, so we do have an executive session following this work session. We'll take a 5-minute break in between, and it'll also give Austin a chance to sign out of the webinar and then sign into the executive session Zoom link. So I will close the LCC Board of Education work session.